Life is truly worth living. However, as many of you know watching, it does come with its share of pitfalls. If you can relate, then perhaps you'll have flashbacks watching today's message. You see, it's about one of my favorite biblical characters, David, who shares with us a time when he found himself down in what he describes as a horrible pit. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Donnice Tabor, pastor of Divine Church in Metro Atlanta, where we believe it's all about His will, His way, His word. Let us now receive this short but thought-provoking message. Psalm 40, verses 1 through 3. I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up and also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. He has put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in the Lord. And for a point of emphasis, let me read that second verse again. He brought me up and also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. I want to speak to you for the next few moments from this thought: brought up and brought out. Here in today's lifted text, the psalmist David seems to be in great distress and has found himself in trouble. You see, he has fallen into a horrible pit which contains miry clay. In other words, that is to say that it is very wet and very muddy, and he seems unable to pull himself out. Knowing how trouble can be, having experienced my own share of it, you know what I'm thinking? Perhaps he's sinking yet farther into this pit. Someone may be asking, Pastor, what could be considered a pit in our lives? For some parents who may be watching who had high hopes and dreams for a child, I would say to them, it is the wayward child who has been heavily influenced by peers. Now the family is experiencing a pitfall. Another example may be the straying spouse who has become unfaithful, and there the couple is having to experience a pitfall. Another one might be this. Some of you watching may have become resentful of a family member, a rival coworker, or a neighbor. And for you, you've fallen into a pit of jealousy. And lastly, I can't help but think about the global unrest that the world is currently experiencing. I believe it's caused by what is seemingly an intense dislike or ill will towards people of color. Now, the world is reminded of the pitfall of hatred. David makes no mention of neither sickness in his body nor trouble caused by friends or enemies, and therefore it's reasonable to believe that he's experiencing some type of inward peace, or loss of peace rather, and in tranquility. There's a disturbance in his spirit, which is serving as his greatest cause of distress. Now experiencing this despondency or hopelessness, David's prevailing doubts and fears regarding his internal state has clearly set in. In spite of this, though, David opens this chapter by saying, I waited. The first thing I noticed seeping from this text was this: sometimes we must wait. Which he tells us in verse 1, he says, I waited. Confirmation can be found of the benefits of waiting on God over in Isaiah the 40th chapter, verse 31, which says, For they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. Man, they shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. When David states, I waited, he clearly shows his belief that God was going to provide for him some much desired relief. The word waited in Hebrew is kavah, which simply means to expect or to patiently tarry. David was so sure that God in his own time would rescue him that I was actually able to see our second point leaking from this text, and that is, we must wait patiently. The third word used in the text by David is patiently. David seems to know that those of us who really trust in God would have to wait on him to deliver them and would have to do so without doubt and fear. It's clear that his relief did not come quickly, yet and still he waited patiently. It teaches those of us who truly trust in God to do so by resolving to continual believing, hoping, and praying until our change comes. What seems to make his wait easier and more exciting is that somehow not only was he waiting, but he had developed a solid level of expectancy. And I believe most of you watching would have to say, it does no good to wait and wait patiently if there's no assurance while waiting. We would ask, then why wait? Brought up and brought out. David had learned to wait with expectancy. He had arrived at this place of comfort, no doubt, from his previous experiences with God. And therefore, even in this great time of distress, he records, I believe, for God's honor, and definitely for those of you watching today, that we all might be encouraged by his words. David confirms that for anyone with doubt, that God answers prayer. He writes in verse 1, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. Those of us who wait patiently on God, though the wait may be for a while, please remember now, it will not be in vain. Rest assured now that God is not hard of hearing, and therefore not only will he hear us, he will answer us. As a matter of fact, the word incline in Hebrew is natah, which means stretch out, to bow, extend, or cause to yield. David knew in order to be heard, he had to cry out to God, and in doing so, God would extend himself down to the horrible pit he found himself in. Why would God do that? To listen and therefore to hear his cry. Brought up and brought out. The third and final thing I noticed pouring from this text is this: it's worth the wait. He became a recipient of God's grace all because he had learned through experience the few things that I've shared with you today. In verse 2 and 3, he says, he brought me up and also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. He has put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in the Lord. In closing, just as David in the text, sometimes we find ourselves down and out. And in a matter of speaking, we're in a pit. We're at a low point, a cold point, a lonely point, a muddy point, or even a sticky point. I want to say to you, regardless where you find yourself at today, if you cry out to God, he'll hear you and raise you up and out of the pit you're in. And you'll be able to join David and many others with your own personal testimony, which is simply brought up and brought out.